Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Izuku met a kid who wanted to become a villain when he was little, Izuku x Harem movie. So before we start, please go check out the author of this fanfic, TheWriteFiction. Link is in the description. Also subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's begin the video. Chaos and terror had been brought to the city of Mizurufu, Japan, unlike any seen before in its long and turbulent history since its founding. The reason why was, as obvious, as a blazing fireball in the middle of an icy wasteland. The entire landmass that the metropolis was resting on, from its furthest peak to its closest landmark, had literally been razed from its foundations, and was poised floating above the prefecture it had previously been resting on, leaving a chasm 40 miles wide, and 5 miles deep resting in the heart of the country. Like a scene from the craziest sci-fi/action movie ever conceived, the entire city slowly lifted up into the stratosphere, breaking through the clouds while small chunks of earth around the edge of the levitating metropolitan plot broke away, and cascaded into the large fissure below. Needless to say, the situation was complete and utter madness. It was like the entire community was being abducted by aliens. However, at the heart of the sweeping town, in the central square of the floating megacity where the ruins of the tallest skyscraper stood ablaze, ruined, and displaced from its original position were the people involved in this physics-defying calamity. Standing at the base of the leaning tower, which overlooked the whole metropolis, and the square below, were a group of 3 individuals. The first one was a boy with ash blonde, wild spiky hair, wild red eyes, and was of average, young adult height. He was currently dressed in a black and orange uniform, with multiple belts crossing his chest and torso, as well as grenade-looking devices on his back, waist, and arms. The second was a young girl with long brown hair, wearing a skin-tight black and pink suit that hugged at her curvaceous figure, with very astronaut-like elements decorating it, and the remains of a damaged space helmet sitting over her dome. Both individuals' clothes were in complete tatters and ruined. The blonde's suit was missing the entire right half, showing off his arm and chiseled frame, as well as an insane number of gashes and bruises, whereas the girl's suit had cuts and tears all over it, with the entire midsection and right thigh pieces gone. She also had blood trickling down from the top of her head, while her male compatriot was dripping from the mouth. The third individual of their group, however, looked worse for wear. The entire top part of his suit was gone, leaving him standing in black and green spandex pants, boots, and gloves, all of which hugged at his muscular, athletic form, which was covered in all sorts of bruises, burns, and scrapes. Looking as though they'd been beaten to within an inch of their lives was the one thing all 3 young adults shared in common, and all of them were bent over and panting in exhaustion. They also had their eyes transfixed to the top of the burning skyscraper in front of them, where the cause of their miserable states was standing at the topmost peak of the structure. This took the form of a curvaceous, dark-skinned young woman around 20 years old, the same age as the trio, with long, spiky blonde hair that grew all the way down her smooth back, giving her the appearance of a kogel. She wore a black bikini and thong topped by spiked shoulder pauldrons, which were buckled at the front by a skull-shaped trinket, a long black cape with green on the underside, and a gold headband with a ruby embedded in the front, transforming the headpiece into a crown. Furthermore, she also had 2 large horns protruding from her head, similar in form to pony tsunatori, curving upwards, and giving her the appearance of the devil. She certainly looked the part, as if her menacing grin and wide, crimson-red eyes didn't do that already. While the trio on the ground continued to glare up at the dark figure with the sexy, buxom figure, and the skimpy, evil sorceress costume, the blonde-haired woman in question simply scoffed in disappointment. "You're still holding back against me, Izu-chan. Why?" she asked, drawing a snarl from Bakugo, while the villain gestured towards the ruined city around them. "Is it because you don't want to destroy what's left of Mizurufu? Because you don't want to risk sending this man-made meteor crashing back down into the planet, and wiping out 2/3 of the population of the Earth?" Her eyes then snapped back to them in realization. "Or is it because the rest of your companions are lying unconscious or grievously injured across the surrounding suburbs?" Gritting his teeth in anger, the 20-or-so-year-old Izuku Midoriya, along with Katsuki and Achiko, glanced over their shoulders. When they did, they clearly saw the resulting fallout of the multiple, monumental battles that had unfolded in their respective absences, in the form of multiple members of their graduating class, their teachers, and a couple other pro-heroes lying in broken wrecks within eyeshot of the square. Those who were closest included Minoru Mineta, who was impaled by 2 stakes in his hands to a building wall 5 stories above the ground on the other side of the city center, and bleeding from multiple cuts down the concrete, Gyro, her uniform torn to shreds, and her equipment lying in busted pieces around her, as she lay curled up in the middle of a large impact crater, Denki Kaminari, who was currently trapped underneath a collapsed tree, and Tsuyu Ejiri, and Fumikage Tokoemi, both of whom were lying side by side next to one another with various bruises and battle scars in the open, and these were only the ones that they could see. The others were all scattered across the entire city, and not in states that would be considered fit, healthy, or well. Adding them all together, including the ones that they could not see, but were still out there regardless, had Midoriya, Bakugo, and Uraraka turned to flare up at the woman responsible for this whole mess. The instant their eyes landed on her, the blonde with the curved horns growing out of her skull shook her head pityingly. It's such a shame they tried so hard, and yet I still defeated them all with ease. Her gaze immediately shifted back down to the 3 heroes, as a dark shadow crossed over her eyes. Frankly, I think you should have chosen your friends more wisely. Having heard enough of her derogatory B.S., an infuriated Uraraka stomped forward, and screamed up at the sorceress. They were your friends too, Gyron. Her shout caused the female villain to recoil slightly. The young woman with the messy brown hair and burns around her stomach grabbed her arm, and tensed, causing her suit to tighten against her skin, and the debris at her feet to levitate. You went to the U.A together with them, trained with them, studied with them, and fought alongside them against the worst villains this world had to throw at us. And for what? To completely destroy them, and leave them lying unconscious, and bleeding, with their faces in the mud? It was then, after seething with rage for several moments longer, Achiko continued. Why did you do all of this? She then took a deep breath, and barked out in dismay. What was the point? At first an uncomfortable silence emanated across their part of the battlefield, punctuated by a gust of wind that carried dust over the ruined square, and the impossibly tilted skyscraper. Though the trio's anger and outrage over the situation was clear, as they were all furious at the female villain, and raring to take her down, the blonde woman merely sighed, and flipped her head back, at the same time turning to smile down at her opponents. Noticing her eyes falling upon her, the battered Izuku blinked in surprise. Gyron-chan? You know what's funny about this world? The sorceress asked, causing the 3 down below to perk up when she began to speak. All of the people on this planet, blessed with remarkable gifts, quirks, and the potential to accomplish great things, rely on the courage and audacity of madmen to protect their cities and keep them safe. She then tilted her head at the trio and frowned. They make the mistaken assumption that someone like All Might will always jump in to save them at the last second. No matter what happens or how dire the situation may become, they believe with all their hearts that someone, no matter which hero it is, will swoop in and rescue them from evil. Remaining quiet for a few seconds, as their former comrade spoke to them, Izuku and the others then balked a little when they saw Gyron's expression suddenly turn foul. Eyes filling with contempt, the woman elaborated in a lower voice. It's not their problem if a villain or a monster appears. It's not, as if their lives will change in any way. They just sit back, watch, and ogle the events that unfold in front of them like it was some act, like some comedic performance, and the heroes narcissistically go along with it, smiling, posing, and declaring everything is going to be alright. But while all this is going on, and the people are mindlessly drinking it in, the events and evil deeds that go unnoticed, the ones that really matter, affect all the other people that we can't see, like Eri-chan and Tamura Shigaraki-kun. You've seen this for yourself firsthand, Izuku-kun. We all have. When she saw the expressions on the trio below change to ones of cold seriousness and thought, Gyron looked to her right and across the horizon, where she could see the cityscape mingling amongst the clouds of the lower stratosphere. While the rest of the world goes unturning, these poor people are left wallowing in the blood and anguish left behind in the aftermath because nobody was there to help them. That's the cold, harsh reality of the world we live in. Heroic deeds beget evil, which in turn inflicts harm upon those who do not deserve it. Yeah, and what's your fucking point? Bakugo asked, shooting his characteristic, intense glare up at the cocky woman staring off into the sunset. Are you going to give us a reason, or are you just going to keep flapping your gums until the sun rises? It pissed him off something fierce that she wasn't giving them the due attention and reverence that they deserved. It was almost like they weren't even there, that they were just ants she could squash at a moment's notice. Gyron, however, was undeterred by Bakugo's impatience, and simply smiled back down at him pleasantly. Allow me to answer that question with another question, the woman concluded, looking over the heroes with that same dark look in her eyes. What are you three going to do against this monster, against this villain? A gust of wind fanning her cape, the female thrust her arm out, and held it up in a taunting pose. If there truly is a reason for heroes to exist, then why don't you come up here, and show me? The moment she finished this statement, the sorceress's eyes darted downwards when she suddenly felt her legs and feet get sealed to the tower when a mass of ice unexpectedly ran up the dark side of the building, and trapped her to the surface in the blink of an eye. When the entire structure became encased in a prison of solid ice, with a mountain of jagged pillars forming around the area to ensnare her, the villain was initially confused as to what was going on, until she heard the yell of a familiar young male echo out behind her. With pleasure, Green's head snapped up in alarm when the roof behind her position exploded, and the form of a red-headed figure with hardened skin and an athletic body covered in a battle-damaged, armored hero costume reminiscent of a Roman gladiator, came leaping out at the woman. His fingers all straightened out into a knife hand, he lunged at his quarry with a stabbing motion, ready to impale her with the full weight of his blow. At the same time he appeared, another figure came charging up the frozen side of the tower, ice propelling his body via a crystallized platform while he rushed the sorceress with his left arm ablaze with orange flames, and his left leg the same. From Gyron's and the trio's point of view, the two heroes Ijiro and Shoto, both of whom were also wounded from the battle, dove at the woman in slow motion, determined to hit her from two sides simultaneously, and end this fight once and for all. However, just when they were nearly upon the trapped female, and ready to cut her down, a wide, amused grin spread across girl's lips, before the witch uttered in a low and sultry voice, "Perfect trace, telekinesis quirk." All of a sudden, the attacking Shoto and Ijiro froze in midair, their bodies going unexpectedly rigid when they were hit by an invisible force that stopped them just a couple of feet from their target. Muscles twitching under the grip of the unseen binds, the pair desperately attempted to force their way out, but to no avail. "What the hell?" The red-haired Red Riot spoke. "I can't move," the red and white-haired Shoto choked, the flames on his arm dissipating onto the wind, while the ice blades he had formed on his other turned to steam. It was then his eyes snapped back towards their foe. "It's her quirk. When did she dash?" Unable to move, as they remained suspended in front of their enemy, all the pair could do was watch and listen, as Gyron crossed her arms over her chest and leered. "I'm surprised to see the two of you still moving. I thought I'd beaten you guys over an hour ago," the female villain remarked, steam starting to float off of her body, as the ice at her feet boiled and melted away from a sudden, rising temperature. "Shoto-kun, Ijiro-kun, you two are a really stubborn pair." It was a good and noble effort. Several seconds later, after the ice at her feet was reverted back to water, the manically grinning woman threw her arms out and gave a loud yell of effort, as a deafening shockwave blasted off of her body and smashed headlong into the two frozen heroes. But not good enough. A loud thunderclap then rang out when Gyron unleashed a wave of invisible energy in all directions. The blast of wind that ripped off of her frame not only sent the two young men she had frozen in place flying, but also decimated the rooftop she was standing on. The metal and glass making up the ruined structure was practically torn apart and sent hurtling into the wind like confetti, while the two teenagers caught up at the head of the blast were thrown into buildings on opposite sides of the square. The pair, though stunned by her repulsive attack, managed to cushion their landings with their respective quirks, while Ijiro hardened his body as best as he could. Todoroki was able to cover himself with ice, as both of them were sent smashing through multiple windows and walls. When they saw their friends get sent flying like a couple of ragdolls, an alarmed Izuku shouted, "Shoto! Ijiro! Shit! Were they okay?" Bringing his hands up and conjuring up a storm of sparks, Bakugo began charging up an attack, as he observed the woman positioned high above them land on the edge of the massive hole she'd ripped into her tower platform. "Fuck this bullshit. I'm incinerating this bitch, right now." However, just as he was bringing his hands back to perform his technique, Gyron beat him to the punch. Seeing Bakugo preparing an attack, the blonde woman took a deep breath and raised her head back. "Perfect trace, anguish absorber quirk." She then let out a blood-curdling cry of rage, which belted out of her throat in the form of a ghostly roar, echoing with the voices of over 1,000 people at once. Her ear-piercing scream reverberated across the entire city, rattling the buildings, and sending gusts of wind rippling outwards in endless, potent waves. The instant Izuku, Bakugo, and Achiko were hit by the woman's sound attack, the trio froze up before bending forward, and clutching random parts of their body in agony, as they were suddenly overcome by the sensations of cold, spirit-crushing grief, and pain. With Achiko clutching her chest, and Izuku grabbing the side of his head, the trio felt a cold chill grip their bodies, as their heads were filled by the images of random people from the past experiencing violent deaths, and torment at the hands of unknown figures. Arg! What the hell is this? Bakugo shouted, clenching his eyes shut, as the sound waves continued to rattle them. All the pain and loss suffered by countless people across the planet who have been unjustly wronged, Izuku growled back, tears brimming in his eyes, as he could practically feel the people's traumatic emotions surging through him. The gut-wrenching reality of what he was witnessing played out in front of him over and over like a strobe hitting a reel of film was almost indescribable. So much pain. While she continued screeching at the top of her lungs, Gyron snapped her arms in front of her body, forming an X shape with her limbs, and set her eyes on her targets. Perfect trace, all for one combination. During which time, the pair of horns she had on top of her head lit up a bright orange, and two large opal-like gems emerged from her forearms, which also started to glow and pulse with fiery energy. Once the aura in her appendages had stabilized, the woman stopped screaming, and took on a serious look, as she focused all her efforts on her arms. When their bodies stopped trembling, the three heroes on the ground looked up in confusion, with Achiko giving a blink of surprise. She stopped screaming dash? Solar cannon. A deafening howl, like a hurricane, filled the entire square when a massive white blast erupted from the villain's crossed arms like a geyser, and engulfed the air, expanding at light speed, as it rocketed towards the three heroes below. Izuku, Bakugo, and Achiko could only recoil in horror, as the wall of blinding white energy thundered towards them at an unheard of speed, before seemingly swallowing them up, and ripping through the city behind them a split second later. An entire line of apartment blocks and office buildings were practically incinerated when the comet of a blast tore across the floating landmass, and over the edge, where it then streaked over the horizon, cutting off the feed of energy to the attack. Gyron watched the light fade, and lowered her arms. When she saw the plume of smoke and dust in front of her fade away on the wind, she immediately noticed that her attack had burnt a trench over 100 meters wide from her position all the way to the very outskirts of the metropolis. From this observation alone, it was easy to say that anyone that had been caught up in the middle of that attack would have surely been turned to ash. Emotionally targeted sound waves combined with a solar energy wave, fired through means of a body enhancement, cosmic, and energy compression quirk. It's a nice little combo I was saving just for you guys. However, just when it seemed like she'd won, after giving a quick survey of the area, Gyron smirked, as his gaze trailed up the length of her proudly formed fissure. Quick reflexes, Tenny-kun. You managed to save everyone lying in the path of that blast in less than a second. She then tilted her head to the side in an intrigued manner. And here I thought you would have been incapacitated like all the rest. Standing on the edge of the massive trench, several hundred yards away from where the attack had started, an exhausted and battle-scarred Tenya Ida, his armor all in ruins, carefully set the unconscious bodies of Tsuyu, Fumikage, and Kyoka on the ground, along with a still-conscious Hanta, who'd also unwittingly been lying in the path of the blast. Damn. Thanks, Ingenium, the raven-haired boy with the gash across his cheek and chest coughed out, his own body covered in burns from the fight he'd had with the woman an hour prior. That was a close one. Having obviously sprinted across the city at blinding speeds, picking up the bodies of his friends along the way to get them out of their enemies' crosshairs, the muscular young man in glasses hissed, as he shakily collapsed to his knee. Glancing down his battered suit to his calf, he saw that the exhaust on his leg had been burnt black, obviously from just barely dodging the blast that Gyron had fired from her elevated position. From the way it sputtered when he flexed his leg, the man knew that he was not going to be running circles around their foe anytime soon. Shit, she got me, Tenya murmured, shaking his head furiously while Hanta sat up from where he'd been set down. Tsuyu and Fumikage meanwhile also slowly twitched back to life, their eyes flickering open, as consciousness slowly returned to them. This is completely unacceptable, getting damaged like this now his engines had been knocked out. Man, take it easy, Hanta said, watching, as the bird-faced Fumikage also sat up in a daze. We're all getting our asses kicked out here. It was then, after surveying the war-torn city around him, and whistling at the enormous smoking crater sitting nearby, the raven-haired young man's gaze then snapped back towards the square in alarm. Wait, what about Midoriya, and the others? Sitting in what was formerly the square, but was now part of the much more impressive fissure, a single, perfectly circular black rock smoking, and charred from the blast that it engulfed it could be seen jetting out of the trench. In contrast to everything else in the immediate vicinity, this unremarkable stone seemed like the only thing that had survived the landscape-reducing attack. That was until the inanimate object suddenly crumbled apart, revealing Izuku, Bakugo, and Hachiko kneeling warily underneath it, along with a still miraculously conscious Momo Yayorozu, Kami, and Mei Hatsum, adorned in a skin-tight white bodysuit with various, high-tech, and sleek armor plates covering it, giving her the appearance of wearing a plug suit. The pink-haired inventor, an engineer, lifted up her smudged goggles, and grinned over her shoulder at Izuku. Woo! That could have ended badly. Good thing my babies, and I got us here just in time. She said this while patting her jet boots, which hissed to let off some excess heat. Seeing the shield his former classmate and fellow hero Yayorozu had erected to protect them crumble away, Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, and looked across at their enchanting savior. Thanks, Momo-chan Mei-chan. We owe you one. Carrying multiple bruises, and cutting herself, the beautiful yet out-of-breath female hero sucked in air, and looked back at Midoriya with a smile. Don't mention it, really. She then turned her attention back to the top of the building the blast had originated from, where she quickly spotted the culprit standing in the same spot, untouched and unperturbed. I used solar reflectors on top of a 100mm steel dome to deflect that blast, and it barely managed to hold up. I doubt that's going to work a second time. Standing up when the barrier overhead fully collapsed on them, a noticeably pissed-off Bakugo grunted, and slammed his right fist into his left palm, causing a miniature flash and an explosion to go off. You won't have to do it a second time. I'll lay her out before she gets another chance to let off another shot. Narrowing her eyes on the sorceress responsible for destroying most of the city, a similarly battle-worn Kami huffed in an aggravated manner, and tugged at the collar of her figure-hugging jumpsuit. Considering the kind of person we're fighting right now, I doubt that's going to be an easy task. Grinning menacingly, as sparks shot off of his hands and forearms, Bakugo cocked back his right, and stepped past Momo and Kami. We'll see about that. Moving into the open, and sensing his friends moving back for their own safety, the wild-haired boy gave a loud roar, and thrust his hand forward, aiming it at the tilted skyscraper. Ultra AP shot! A sonic boom then rang out when he unleashed a beam-shaped explosion, which broke the sound barrier, as it streaked towards the skyscraper. When the blast struck the remains of the tower, it lit up like several crates of C4 charges going off all at once, filling the sky with a blinding flash, and a fiery mushroom cloud, which belched into the atmosphere. As a result, the top 10 floors beneath Gyron were disintegrated, while the rest of the building was smashed into rubble from the fireball that engulfed it. As smoke and debris pelted the surrounding area, battering the district, and leaving the skyscraper as nothing but a useless, twisted hunk of metal and cement, the group's immediate thought was that they finally got her. Whistling after seeing the scale of the explosion, a smiling Mei nodded in an impressed manner. Good shot. The wide grin that spread across Bakugo's face said the same thing. Ha! How did you like that, Cal? Mei, it was okay. The voice speaking up directly behind the group immediately had everybody's eyes widen, and expressions transform into looks of terror, as a hole composed entirely of black smoke opened up in the air, and deposited Gyron on the ground just 2 feet from both Izuku and Hachiko. Face manic, and reflecting nothing but murderous intent, and a bloodthirsty smile, the completely unscathed female villain leered at the group, as all their heads snapped around to face her all at once. Surprise. The moment she uttered this word, an alarmed Izuku and Hachiko spun around, and threw a kick and a backhanded punch towards her respectively, only to watch her body sink into the floor, and vanish in an instant. As a result of his punch missing, Midoriya's face twisted into one of shock. Before he could even finish, his gaze once again spun around to see Gyron leap out of the ground first, kicking Momo in the chin, and sending her flying several yards away. By the time Midoriya's body spun around entirely, their opponent had leapt completely out of the ground, and cartwheeled over Kami, using her shoulders as a springboard, while the hero formerly from another school attempted to nail her with a blow. Mirio Togata's quirk permeation. While still hovering over Kami, the world moving around her in super slow motion, Gyron threw a grin across at Bakugo, who she could see was now attempting to lock on and counter her. You know, I could never understand what everyone was gabbing on about you becoming a great hero someday. You're an absolutely shit hero, Baku-chan, especially with that trashy personality of yours. After all completing her flip over her human post and using the momentum from her maneuver, Gyron picked the stunned Kami up, spun her around, and slammed her straight into Bakugo, knocking both heroes flying across the ground at speed. Bullies never make good heroes, as Bakugo and Kami crashed across the floor, bouncing like ragdolls from the force of Gyron's throw, and having the air knocked out of their lungs. Mei leapt forward and, thrusting her left fist forward, took aim with the scope that popped up from her gauntlet. Rocket punch! A gunshot then echoed out, as the mechanical fist on the end of her arm was launched at Gyron from 8 yards away, a cable attached to it, and extending at high speed. At that range, it was impossible for her to miss. But Gyron, hearing the attack approaching, simply smiled, and produced a small circular portal directly behind her. The moment Mei's rocket punch shot through it, a second portal opened in front of the inventor, and launched the woman's metal fist right back at her. Caught off guard, the woman was hit clean in the stomach, a load off leaving her, as she was knocked tumbling out of the fissure they were fighting in. Jumping forward the moment she saw Mei attempt her attack, Izuku made her own move. With a yell of effort, the brown-haired girl slammed her hand into the floor, and whipped it forward, using her quirk to hurl a pile of rubble towards Gyron, who still had her back turned to them. When the villain turned around to face her, and Midoriya, she was hit square in the chest by one of the massive stones, and sent hurtling into the sky with a cluster. As she flew, Izuku pressed forward with her assault. Second Moon, the female heroine, then proceeded to whip her arms about in front of her, telekinetically sending more and more rubble lying around them into the air, and up toward the suspended Gyron's position. In a matter of seconds, large chunks of debris from the city began mashing into the orb floating up into the clouds, trapping the sorceress between hundreds of tons of rock and metal, which continued to build and build as the seconds went by. Soon, a couple of the buildings beneath the growing cluster were ripped from their foundations, sparks and explosions going off, as a profusely sweating Izuku, crying out in agony, forcefully sent them flying towards the sphere of rubbish hanging in the air. When the office and apartment blocks slammed together moments later, snapping, twisting, and molding into a single mass of metal, the orb of debris had grown so much it was almost like there was a small moon hovering above the city itself. From the way the metal and cement were being compressed into each other, it was also highly likely that the villain Uraraka had trapped in the center of its mass was being crushed into paste. Blood started to trickle out of her nose, as the vessels in her body started bursting one after the other from the strain. A painting Izuku gasped for air, as she struggled to keep her hands up, and her structure from breaking apart. I could make it bigger, but in my condition I won't be able to hold it up without passing out. This is our one chance, she then spun, and shouted at the observing Midoriya. Izuku! Now! Right! Crouching down, as bolts of blue lightning ran down his toned form, causing his muscles to throb and tense all at once. Izuku then sprang off of the ground in a blur of motion, breaking the sound barrier on takeoff, and punching a 40-foot wide crater into the floor. The green-haired boy soared into the sky like a missile, flying straight towards the ball of debris now coming into orbit in the atmosphere of the planet. Gritting his teeth, as he closed in on the celestial object of metal, concrete, and earth in the blink of an eye, the boy cocked back his right fist, and took aim. Detroit closing the distance, as his body built up more momentum and power, at the same time bulking up from the full call of One for All. Izuku gritted his teeth, and threw his attack in the form of a wide, three-quarter uppercut. SMAASH, his fist struck the floating planetoid in the base, and, from there, shit got crazy. The entire assembly of rubble and debris was literally blown to smithereens, with the side of the orb Izuku had struck disintegrating from the shockwave produced by his knuckles, as the remains and larger chunks of the sphere were sent flying further skywards in the direction of the young man's monstrous blow. One of the boulder chunks in the very center of the anomaly detonated, and was then followed by a black figure flying out of the flames, and straight towards the still ascending Izuku. With his full attention locked on the exploding meteor, Midoriya frowned when he saw Gyron, covered in dirt and dust, fly right at him, and stop mid-air, her arms and legs thrust outward, halting her momentum. The instant she saw the villain reappear, a physically drained Izuku looked on in disbelief, as did an observing Mei, Bakugo, and Kami. No way! She doesn't have a scratch on her. Drifting through the sky amidst a floating field of rubble and granite, both Izuku and Gyron glared at one another with their respective, serious expressions in play, irises and pupils dilated, with a dark shadow hanging ominously over their gazes. Those heroes who were conscious and watching from the ground could only hold their breaths, as they all waited with anticipation for one of them to do something. After staring intently at one another, floating in space, and patiently holding their positions for a response, Gyron then broke the ice with a large, villainous, bloodthirsty grin, which was only matched by a heroic smile given by the young adult Izuku. Finally, the number one hero and defender of justice has finally come out to face me. Me. One-on-one. Mano a mano, Gyron shouted, her voice echoing across the heavens, as she faced off against her arch-rival and nemesis. In return, Izuku responded to her glee with a proud, brave statement of his own, dripping with the inspiration from his most respected mentor. Your evil deeds have gone on long enough, villain. As this planet's protector and new symbol of peace, I will stop your rampage and put an end to this madness with my own two hands. Gyron's intentions and delight were further accentuated by the evil, villainous, and rather cliché laugh she gave moments later, her cape billowing behind her, and rocks flying past her face in a dramatic juxtaposition. Kia ha ha ha! Do you think you have what it takes to defeat me? The most evil, most beautiful, most powerful, and the most feared villain of all time? She then whipped her hand forward, and pointed right at Izuku's handsome face, which was only hanging just a few feet in front of her, and an inch away from her digit. Do you really have the power and the guts to take me on? You bet I do, Midoriya cried out, bringing a hand forward, and tightening it into a fist in a very All Might manner, the knuckles of which came close to brushing the girl's chin. He then took that same fist, and slammed it into his chest in a guts pose, despite the fact that both of them were floating hundreds of feet above the Muzdalifa metropolis, which itself was hanging 2 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Clench those teeth, miss, and prepare yourself, because you are about to get a taste of the full, unbridled power of true justice. At this, the woman's grin widened into one of hysterical anticipation. Bring it on, hero! Watching and listening from down below, as the pair's voices echoed across the battlefield, a thoroughly overwhelmed Hachiko, Bakugo, Mei, and Kami could only stare in utter confusion, as they had no idea what the heck was going on. Even the intellectual genius Momo, who was busy massaging her jaw from the previous sneak attack, couldn't understand what was transpiring. After what seemed like a surefire killer move had failed to bring down the sorceress that they were still battling, every single one of them then expected Midoriya to unload all of his power on her the instant she came within range. From the amount of damage she had brought to their home, and the harm she'd caused to everyone around them, they'd expected their friend and compatriot to release all of his pent-up rage upon his opponent in the name of peace and uncompromising righteousness. But then, out of nowhere, the two warriors started smiling at each other like old friends, and spouting cheesy lines and speeches only fit for a comic book. It was like the pair were acting out some sort of play from when they were in elementary school, where one of them was the knight, and the other one was the smart, smack-talking dragon. It was then, after scratching his head over the sight for a moment, a look of realization suddenly crossed Katsuki's face, before the boy closed his eyes, and smirked in disbelief. Deku, that brain-dead moron. His comment had Kami look across at him in confusion. He's having fun. Izuku-kun, Hachiko whispered, clutching the side of her arm, as she gazed up at the two individuals high above for a moment, before a soft smile pulled across her lips. Even Mei, who'd activated her quirk to get a better look at what was going on overhead, couldn't help but sigh and shake her head. When a pair of devil wings suddenly sprouted from Gyron's back in an effort to keep her airborne, the third round of the duo's epic clash began. Cranking back his right foot, Midoriya started off their brawl with a well-timed, aerial roundhouse kick, which collided head-on with the villain's knee, which she threw in an effort to intercept the blow. A loud thunderclap filled the sky, as the debris field around them was blasted away, and turned to dust, while the clouds floating around them also dispersed from the outward traveling force of the blow. From there, both Midoriya and Gyron began duking it out at high altitude, the sky filling with the sounds of a raging thunderstorm of shockwaves and sonic booms, as the pair traded blow after mountain-splitting blow in a flurry of movements. Those who were observing from down below, including Tenya, Tsuyu, and Hachiko, all lost balance, and fell over when the tremors from above rained down, and rattled the floating island they were standing on. The very same quakes also caused a couple of the nearby buildings to collapse. Using skill and technique only familiar to them, the pair continued to fire off punches and kicks with surprising grace and precision, continuing to defy physics by remaining airborne and unleashing hell upon one another. The two fighters locked in combat then started to gradually descend, all the while circling one another and launching numerous combinations of attacks and counters. As of right now, I have surpassed both All for One, his successor, and Vectra in skill, power, and ambition, and forced all other criminals around the world into surrendering, Gyron shouted above the shockwaves, as their fists continued to collide with one another with murderous precision. After parrying one of Midoriya's chops, the female villain countered by spinning on the spot and, producing an abnormally long, devil-like tail from behind, whipped it out at his head in an attempt to decapitate him. However, sharp as ever, Midoriya managed to duck and counter with a spinning back kick. That means, even with your overwhelming strength and desire to protect everything that is good in this world, you can't possibly hope to defeat me. Oh yeah? Izuku roared, his kick slamming into the girl's forearm before he ducked in with a backward spinning blow towards her neck where her guard was down. Then why don't you take that awesome power of yours and use it against me? His eyes narrowed as bolts of lightning and steam shot off of the arm he was swinging at her neck, which rapidly built up momentum just centimeters from impact. Alabama chop, however, just when it seemed like his attack would land and cut through Green's neck like butter, the female villain surprised her opponent by suddenly catching his wrist and redirecting his blow, nullifying the force of the attack completely. The moment she did, she then hooked her other hand around and struck 2 fingers into the joint, bending his arm with a snap before following through with her elbow on the same arm from the outside, driving it into the muscle and causing a second crack to ring out. As a result, Midoriya let out a shout of pain before retaliating by breaking out of her hold and throwing another spin kick at the woman. Ducking his retaliatory strike, Gyron suddenly flapped her newly grown devil wings and placed herself above the hero. Extending her right hand, she then focused all of her energy into her limb, instantaneously causing the muscles to expand, twist, and vibrate at high speed. The sight of black lightning starting to emanate off of it a millisecond later caused the stunned Izuku's eyes to widen. Here's another demonstration. Locomotive Corkscrew plus Muscle Enhancement X4, Electrical Discharge X3, and Air Compression X4. Gyron leered before yelling at the top of her lungs, "Perfect trace! Atmospheric combustion!" What followed was an ear-splitting shockwave rippling off of her palm, as she fired a compressed bubble of air at point-blank range into Midoriya's chest, which hit him like a bullet train, and sent him plummeting in a blur towards the ground. Izuku ended up slamming back first in the middle of the downtown area, smashing a 200-meter-wide crater into the floor, while Gyron's attack generated an explosive shockwave that annihilated the buildings standing all around the area. If Izuku's impact wasn't enough to cause damage to his surroundings, those buildings that didn't turn into rubble from the blast of wind collapsed into the sinkhole that the hero punched into the ground with his body. While all the young heroes watching the battle from afar gaped at the sheer destructive force brought down by the 2 warring fighters, the flying Gyron laughed obnoxiously and brought her hands above her head. "What's wrong, hero? Don't tell me that that's all you've got." Palms facing each other, a high-pressure wind started to spin around her, whipping, twisting, swirling, and gathering in the center of her hands. As dust and debris ripped around her through the literal cyclone that formed around her body, the woman concentrated all of that effort on her fingers, where a glowing blue ball of pulsating energy started to form. "No. Wait. You're still holding out on me. That's it. You're still not coming at me with everything you have, right, Izuku-chan? Well then, if that's the case, let me give you some proper motivation." The sphere of unstable energy crackled and sparked as it grew rapidly in size, slowly beginning to fill the sky with a second sun. With the weather reacting extremely to the anomaly now taking shape over the floating town, through the whirlwind, dust, and debris, and observing Tenya's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the attack the woman was preparing next. She's accelerating and gathering the wind around her all into one spot and transforming it into plasma. The man spoke, unable to hide his astonishment, as he watched bolts of lightning shoot down from the energy sphere to strike a building, which was split in half and sent crashing to the ground. This sight only served to have Ida and the others around him tremble in fear, as the hum from the now stadium-sized ball of energy began to echo across the metropolis. If she was to drop that, right here and now, she would wipe the entire city off of the map. There wouldn't be anything left but ash. Wind quirk, plus acceleration X5, and vector manipulation X4. Though the calculations are incredibly complicated, it still gives me enough power to do this, Gyron shouted, a laugh leaving her lips, as she cocked back her hands and prepared to hurl the throbbing sphere of plasma down at the crater below. "Stop this next attack if you can." Perfect tra. She didn't even get the chance to finish loading up. Just as she was about to drop the ball, the crater beneath her exploded, and a blast of wind equivalent to the force of a hurricane shot upwards, hitting Gyron head-on, the act of which caused her manipulation of the wind vectors around her to shift, messing up her calculations, and dispelling the sphere of plasma she'd formed. covering her face. As she was nearly sent flying by the invisible attack, the woman then looked down, and immediately spotted a figure standing in the heart of the fissure. He dispelled my plasma ball by forcefully altering the wind vectors, and changing my formula? Gyron thought, a smile quickly tugging across her lips. Clever boy. Standing on both feet with his right fist extended, a slightly banged-up Izuku grinned before dropping his arm, and taking a new stance. Not on my watch. Crouching down, his left arm dangling uselessly at his side, the young hero buried his right hand into the floor and, with a mighty roar, and a spark of electricity, heaved the ground upwards. Texas table toss. Wait, what did you just dash? Gyron asked, not sure what his next move was until a wall of black suddenly appeared in front of her. This caused the flying woman to look up in alarm. Whoa! What the fuck? In an instant, the sorceress found herself stuck inside a cloud of rubble, earth, and the remains of multiple buildings, some of which were still intact, as Izuku, using all of his strength, had literally ripped up and thrown an entire block of city up at her from the ground. From a distance, the amount of debris in the nebula looked like an entire wall had been thrown. The act of doing so brought a great deal of astonishment to the female villain, who now found herself floating inside what could only be described as a tightly packed asteroid field. The neighborhood we're fighting over, he flipped it up at me? What a show-off. Clenching her fists, as she looked around the tumbling cloud of rubble, the powerful warrior brought her hands up, and took a defensive stance. Does he think he can attack me from the blind spots of this scattered junk? It won't work. Generating a set of exhaust pipes on her left arm, and bulking it up through a quick muscle augmentation, she then thrust it out, and unleashed a blast of wind. This is nothing more than house dust to me. While her swipe effectively cleared the way of much of the debris, when Gyron retracted her arm, and looked around, her expression then became one of confusion. Hang on, something's weird here, she thought, looking to her right, and then back down towards her feet. It feels like the gravity has been reduced to zero, like I'm floating inside a vacuum. Hell, I can't even see the ground. Her eyes widened, as she looked over her shoulder. That freak. How high did he throw me? Before she could fully comprehend the magnitude of the situation, as she continued to drift aimlessly through the debris field, Gyron was unable to react in time when, from behind one of the massive boulders hovering over her, Izuku's hidden form rolled into view. Right arm drawn back over his left shoulder, the man gave a mischievous smirk before dropping down from the floating boulder, and smashing his elbow into the back of the woman's head, hitting the sorceress with the sound of a cannon going off, and drawing a scream of pain from the villain. Kansas elbow. The shockwave that followed from the blow disintegrated several chunks of rubble floating around them, while the villain was sent smashing into the top half of a weightless apartment building. When her body blasted through the 10 floors of the tower, she ended up smashing the structure to pieces, before her form came shooting out the other side. Landing against another flying boulder, Gyron then started hopscotching through the debris field at high speed. She kept this up for a few seconds, until she changed course, and shot straight back at Midoriya, who also sprang off of a boulder, and flew right at the woman to meet her halfway at the same speed. Bleeding from the cuts over her body and mouth, the maniacally grinning Gyron cried out, "You beautiful bastard! I knew you loved to play dirty. Come, and get some!" Izuku roared back, drawing his right arm, and powering up, bolts of lightning shooting off of his full call mode, as he took aim at his opponent. Try, and block this. Detroit shotgun combo. His fist then literally transformed into a blur, as what seemed like 100 punches flew straight at Gyron in a wall of knuckles. The number of blows he threw in that second was so fast that it looked like all his attacks came in at once, making it seem like he was going to lay his opponent out. Gyron, however, met Izuku's barrage with her own, unleashing a hail of palm and finger strikes that clashed with the hero's fist blow for blow. Multiple thunderclaps rang out, as the pair traded attacks at blinding speed, with the force of each swing parting the cloud of debris surrounding them, and shattering the boulders orbiting their position. Gritting her teeth when she felt the strain from taking the man's blows reverberate through her arms, the blonde sorceress decided to break off early, and sprang back, dodging his last punch by a hair. He's gotten a lot tougher. I have to get away, faster than him. Her wings sinking back into her body, the woman began springing off of boulders one after the other, putting distance between her and Midoriya, as fast as she could. Higher than him, she then started gaining altitude by hiking up the airborne debris, her body traveling in the form of a blur, while Izuku stayed close behind in hot pursuit. Watching Izuku gaining on her, an alarmed Gyron gritted her teeth, and drew back her right fist, sending energy into her hand, and gathering power for a counterattack. Izuku is getting stronger and stronger as this fight drags on. I have to match him, watch his movements, and look for an open crash. Gyron was effectively cut off when the top half of her body ended up smashing into something solid, burying her up to her waist in rock. Stunned from the sudden impact, the twitching woman remained where she was embedded while her brain slowly worked out what the hell had happened. The ground is in the sky, as the flying boulders and rocks started crashing down around her, shaking the ground of the floating city they were fighting over. The female villain then blinked into realization. No, that's not it. My senses have been confused. When Izuku chucked the entire suburb up at her, and sent them all hurtling through the sky, he ended up sending them all into a spin like putting dice inside a cup with an insect, and shaking it so that they were bouncing about all over the place, only on a much larger scale. By the time they were done, the bug trapped in the middle of the storm could no longer tell up from down, leaving it completely discombobulated. That's exactly what had happened to her, and, as Gyron lay there with her legs sticking out of the hole she was embedded in, the woman felt Izuku touch down nearby with a loud thud. At the same time the field of debris rained back down on the battle-damaged city. Gritting her teeth when her sense of equilibrium finally returned to her, the now upside-down woman bent her legs back, slammed them into the floor, and yanked herself out of the ground. Popping out like a carrot, the grungy and slightly dazed Gyron picked herself up and, with a manic grin forming once again, glared across at Midoriya. Clutching his wounded left arm, which was still hanging limply at his side, the hero, an inheritor of One for All, frowned, as he slowly turned his attention to his lifeless limb. After studying it for a moment, and making sense of the damages, Izuku then hammered the edge of his knuckles 3 times into the elbow joint, probing it for a few seconds before gripping the forearm ligaments, and twisting them back and forth with an audible crack of bone and muscle. Running his fingers tentatively down the forearm, he then gripped his wrist, and yanked it downwards with a similarly loud snap. And like that, his previously disabled arm was fixed, putting a smile back on his face. Stretching his limb out, and flexing the fingers, Midoriya then formed them into a fist, and channeled the energy of his quirk back into it. I see your Shandong praying mantis fistus. As good as ever, Gyron-chan, Izuku remarked, sliding his feet out, and taking a new stance, as the cloud of dust surrounding them slowly settled. I still remember all the styles and techniques that you taught me back then, and I still remember all the history and literacy lessons you gave me, Izuku-in, Gyron responded, brushing the gunk off of her cheek before unbuckling the cape around her neck. Upon letting it fall away, leaving her in only her skimpy black lingerie uniform, the woman smirked while bolts of black lightning began running up and down her toned body. This is it, isn't it? We finally did it. We sure did, Midoriya began, chains of gold electricity dancing over his muscles, as his power level started to rise again. Just like we promised. And now we're going to end it, Gyron continued, flexing her arms, and grinning excitedly. Yes. This is the only way it can end. One final showdown in a city on the brink of destruction, between the greatest hero on Earth, Deku, and the greatest villain in history, Gyron, the human monster. Fingers cracking, as she flexed them, the woman's leer only seemed to widen even more, as she focused all of her excitement and murderous intent on the young man in front of her, whom she could picture as the same little boy she met all those years ago. If we're going to do this, we're going to do this right. No more tricks, no more quirk copying, no shoot style, all style, claw style, rush style, dance style, or any other style. I don't want to see how All Might fights. Swinging her arms around, Gyron then drops into a wide stance with her arms and fingers primed in the praying mantis style. I want to see how Izuku Midoriya fights. His eyes firing up, as his excitement returned, Izuku slammed his right foot into the ground, clenched his fists, and shouted, "You want it, you got it!" His body then let off a shockwave that bore another crater into the ground, as an aura of gold lightning sparked off of him, accompanied by a wave of steam. As his energy levels climbed, the storm surrounding him intensified, tearing trenches into the ground, and sending debris flying into the air. His muscles throbbing, as he cranked up his quirk to maximum, the young man shouted across at his opponent, whom he could see was bracing herself under the gusts of wind he was hitting her with. I am not holding back anymore. I'm going all out. Another shockwave was accompanied by a blast of golden fire gushing off of Midoriya's body, which knocked over the building ruins surrounding him, and melted the ground, reducing it to a hot, orange sludge that was sent rolling away by his aura. Let's see if you can take it. Yes. Yees, Gyron shouted, feeling the young man's energy level skyrocket, as black smoke started emanating from her shoulders. "This is what I've wanted. This is what I've been waiting for. You and I will go out together," the woman shrieked, her eyes and smile hyper, as her own blue aura exploded from her body, and shredded the ground behind her for hundreds of yards in all directions. Just like Izuku's aura, her power smashed through a couple of buildings, toppling them to the ground, and reducing them to clouds of dust. In a ball of molten rock and death, taking a sprinter stance, the bravely smiling Izuku took aim at her opponent, and, after grinding his feet into the ground, let off another discharge of energy that toppled another building, and caused the floor to crumble into dust. "Ready whenever you are." Leaning on her back foot, the fighting-ready woman laughed, before suddenly charging forward with terrifying force that the sound barrier shattered the ground, and parted the clouds above them. The moment she lifted off, Izuku did, as well, launching himself at full speed towards the woman advancing on him like some kind of monster from a nightmare. Each footfall they made along the floor punched a 10-meter fissure hole into the ground, causing the floor to start collapsing around them, and turn to dust. During their respective charges, as the pair slowly closed the distance on one another, Izuku saw the world slow down around him, and found his mind racing years into the past. He remembered back to his time in the U.A, his periods spent training and fighting alongside his friends, his years spent in junior and middle school, and his days spent playing hero when he was a child. Growing up in his neighborhood, watching broadcasts of All Might's heroics on the television and computer, and then reenacting those fantasies in his free time, both by himself and with the other kids from school. They were all memories that were still fresh in his mind, ones that he treasured, loathed, yet helped shape him into the hero he was today. It almost seems like yesterday when we were just kids playing heroes and villains together in the park, though for the longest time he remembered always being alone back then, and was beaten up by Bakugo and his mates regularly. There were a few people from his youth he could give all his respect and gratitude towards for helping him get to where he was. When I was 4 years old, I learned early on that not all people are created equal, and that some people had more power than others. Growing up, lacking any sort of strength or special abilities had been a handicap of mine for a big part of my life, but I never let that hold me back. In fact, I used my situation as a key to push me forward. Since I found out I wouldn't be the same like the others, I never thought I would ever be able to make it as anything. However, there was one person that I did meet, back on that day at the playground, who showed me that with the right attitude, even someone without any special qualities could become someone great. Both hero and villain closing the final paces of distance between one another, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in their wakes, the pair then slammed their feet into the floor, and threw themselves forward without resistance or hesitation. IzukuHarem, the female sorceress bellowed, as she shot her hand forward in a two-finger thrust, which she aimed right for the fighter's forehead. "Gyron!" Midoriya bellowed back, his cocked back, right arm sparking with electricity, before the man swung it forward in a twisting corkscrew right straight, breaking the sound barrier, as he aimed it right for his target's face. A flash of lightning seemingly struck the point of impact between the two fighters, which was then followed by a blinding white blast that engulfed them, and lit up the entire region. The whole neighborhood was swallowed by an explosion so strong that it literally split the floating city in two. Those heroes who were watching from the sidelines were knocked off their feet, while the battle-hungry and smiling Izuku and Gyron were consumed by the fire generated by their colliding blows, and vanished inside the calamity. Even though my brain told me I could never amount to anything, thanks to the people who guided me, the friends who supported me, and the courage I gained from my struggles, I kept pushing forward, through thick and thin, and through trials, hardships, childhood games, and fantasies transformed into reality. This is the story of how I became the world's greatest hero. Stop it, you guys, that's enough. The shaky, nervous voice of a 5-year-old Midoriya, dressed in a white shirt, green pants, and red shoes, spoke up, as he stood at the defense of two scared children, a little boy and girl who were crouching down behind a playground seesaw, looking beat up, burnt, and scared out of their wits. They don't want to play with you guys anymore. Standing in front of the terrified youngsters was a group of 3 boys. One of them was the adolescent, wild-haired form of Katsuki Bakugo, wearing a dark shirt and khaki shorts, a second, rotund boy in a white singlet and green shorts, and a skinny child in a yellow top, purple t-shirt, and baseball cap. When they heard Izuku's rather brave cry of defiance and kind request to back off, the trio at first gave him a deadpan look. Valiantly maintaining his position and not moving an inch, the brave boy with the messy, green-tinted hair scrunched his brow, and exhaled deeply, as he fixed his attention on the leader. "You're overdoing it again, Kaken." After a moment, a smirk spread across Bakugo's lips. "Really? Am I overdoing it?" Expressing the same look of fear, the trembling youngster with wide eyes gave a much-needed gulp. "Yeah, that's right." Scoffing, the spiky-haired bully then gave Izuku a menacing look. "Heh, that's funny. And I haven't even gotten started yet." He then threw out his hands and tilted his head. "Come on, Deku. Relax. I'm not going to hurt them. I just need a couple of live sandbags to practice using my quirk against, that's all." He then glanced back at his two pals behind him. "Right, boys?" "Yeah, that's right," the tubby youngster replied, at the same time producing a pair of large, devil-like wings from his back that lifted him off the ground with a single flap. While his friend got airborne, the kid with the purple cap extended his fingers, and watched them grow out to an impossible length. He then curled them in a sinister manner. "How else are we going to get better at using our abilities? Chucking cans? Knocking over signs? Jumping over boxes in an alleyway?" Taking a deep breath, as he heard the trio's answers, a rather outraged Izuku clenched his fists, and shot back. "Still, that doesn't mean you can use your quirks against other kids whenever you feel like it. You guys are just being mean." Though he was saying all of this straight out to the three strong, intimidating-looking boys, he was really just putting on a brave face. From the way his body was shivering, he looked like he was ready to bolt, as did the two children cowering in the shadow of the seesaw over his shoulder. After all, this wasn't the first time he'd had to face off against Bakugo and his cronies. This is just like before, Midoriya thought, as memories of a similar encounter he'd had about a year earlier in the park began to resurface. He remembered it like it was yesterday. He tried to protect a little boy whom Bakugo and his friends had roughed up while they were playing a game of heroes, and got carried away. When Izuku stepped in to try and stop them from going any further and hurting the child, they all turned their attention on him, and pummeled him into near unconsciousness with their respective powers. Him, a young 4-year-old boy with no special abilities of his own or any way to defend himself, beaten up by those who had. In truth, that had been a really crappy day for Izuku, and it looked like it was about to happen again. After trotting about the playground, and keeping mostly to himself for the last hour, Izuku thought he was going to have another quiet day. But then Bakugo and his cronies rocked up, and the situation quickly boiled down to yet another confrontation. Giving a frustrated sigh at how stubborn his classmate was being, an irked Kazuki brought his hands up, and slapped a fist into his open palm, the act of which was followed by a loud bang, causing Izuku and the two children behind him to jump when a flash of sparks and smoke exploded against the delinquent's hand. "Ah, Deku, you're just as annoying as ever, acting like some big-shot hero despite having no quirk at all." His statement prompted his two goons to flank him, as all of them quickly set their sights on the green-haired boy standing between them and their quarry. "Alright then, since you're not going to budge, how about this? Instead of practicing on those two, how about we beat you up instead?" A foreboding grin crossed Bakugo's face, as he and his friends proceeded to advance on the child. "You can do that for us, right, tough guy? I mean, you should be more than used to this by now." Izuku's face paled, as he quickly stepped back, and raised his fists higher, taking a defensive stance while he glanced back at the children behind him. Upon seeing their terrified faces, the youngster gritted his teeth, and rounded back on Bakugo and his friends, who he could see were fired up and raring to go. Fine, Izuku stuttered, knowing full well what was going to happen next. "Bring it on. I'll stop you three myself." His statement was immediately followed by a round of laughs from the gang, whose leader then cracked his knuckles and prepared to land the opening blow. "Your funeral." However, just when it looked like Midoriya was about to get swamped by Bakugo and his crew, and beaten to a bloody pulp once again, the two groups suddenly noticed a shadow appear on the ground between them. The shout that echoed out across the area afterwards stopped the kids, and their game died in their tracks. Well, what do we have here?" Blinking in confusion, the group of kids turned their gazes towards the top of the climbing dome standing nearby. When their eyes landed on the peak of the playground equipment, they spotted another child, arms crossed, and what looked like a cape billowing behind them with their figure silhouetted against the clear blue sky. However, when the kids got a better look at the newcomer through the sunlight, they saw that the person was wearing a slightly oversized purple hoodie, khaki shorts with tears and patches in them, and a white sheet tied into a knot around their neck in a makeshift cape. Needless to say, the appearance was both adorable and funny at the same time. It was enough to make the three delinquents stop their attack completely, with Bakugo dropping his arms to stare at the child in confusion. What the dash? He was cut off when the kid took a deep breath and laughed at the top of her lungs in a very forced and obnoxious manner. Kia ha 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 ha. A bunch of insignificant little bugs squabbling about with each other in the park. Well, if there is one thing I know about bugs crouching down, the stranger then sprang off of the dome. The boys then watched in awe, as the Kate Blonde performed a stylish flip through the air before landing on the ground directly beside them in a textbook superhero landing, a loud thud ringing out, as a cloud of dust kicked up around them. When they stood up, the showboating weirdo then threw a wicked grin towards the entourage of delinquents. When there are too many of them, they need to be exterminated. Silence fell, as she stood before the boys, watching them blink, as they stared at her in a mixture of confusion and bewilderment. In that time, Izuku was able to get a much better look at the person with the bed sheet wrapped around their neck. At first the young man thought that this was some boy trying to act like a tough guy, but when he squinted at the face hiding under that purple hood, he recoiled in shock when he saw that the stranger was actually a little girl. She just sounded like a young boy, and had a fierce appearance to match. For a few seconds the children just stared at the grinning kid in the hoodie and sheet. That was until they saw sweat break out on her face, moments before she dropped to her knees, clutched her shins, and gave a startled cry of pain. Gah! Pins and needles! Pins and needles! The girl said to herself while rubbing her legs vigorously. Idiot! Why did I jump from so high? Aya, watching the newcomer nursing her shins, and babbling to herself brought a great amount of amusement to Kazuki and his friends, all of whom shared a laugh before quickly turning their attention to her. As per their dynamic, the blonde boy with the explosive hands was the first to break the ice. Weirdo. What's up with that shitty costume? Are you pretending to be a hero, as well? Hearing this had the blonde girl look up at Kazuki and his three friends. Upon processing the boy's question through a bewildered gaze, the newcomer quickly stood up, placed a hand on her hip and over her mouth, and gave another incredibly exaggerated laugh. Kia ha ha ha! Her exclamation had the three bullies stop and look at her strangely once again. A hero? Don't insult me. I'm nothing like those pathetic weaklings you see on T.V. and the news. They're nothing compared to what I am. Kazuki frowned. Alright. Then what the hell are you supposed to be? Grin widening even more so, despite finding herself surrounded by all three boys with Bakugo's cronies bearing their quirks at her. The girl reached up, gripped the top of her hood, and pulled it further over her face, the act of which caused the shadow created by it to fall over her eyes, giving her a much more menacing look when her irises dilated. The devil. At this, the rotund boy with the wings on his back gave a harsh laugh, before leaping off the ground, and flying right at the child from her right flank. Yeah right, you're just some stupid girl. He drew back his fist when he came within range, ready to deck her, as he flew past. What can you do against the three of us? Izuku gasped, and raised his hand. Watch out. But then, just when it seemed like the newcomer in the hoodie was about to get pummeled, Izuku and the others suddenly saw the blonde step back, grab her cape, and throw it out, catching the boy while he was flying past like a cat jumping into a burlap sack. The airborne child only had enough time to give a muffled cry of surprise before the girl suddenly used his momentum to spin him around and throw him into the nearby Bakugo, who could only gape before he had his friend's body smash into him. Oh! The girl shouted the moment she released her winged attacker. The rest of the kids then watched the two boys tumble to the ground and form a crumpled heap several feet away. Finding himself flattened out underneath his now out-cold classmate, a stunned Kazuki Bakugo gritted his teeth and shoved his hands into his pudgy friend's face. Ow! Get the hell off of me, dumbass! The delinquent shouted, as he struggled to get out from under the body. Grinning triumphantly at taking down her attacker, the young girl stood proudly on the spot with her hands at her sides, completely unaware of the third boy in the purple cap sneaking up behind her with his elongated fingers reaching for her throat. Izuku however did and, not wanting to see the girl get hurt, sprang off the ground and charged at Bakugo's friend. Behind you! His shout caused the tiptoeing boy to turn to him with a start, his momentary surprise giving the 5-year-old Midoriya the opportunity to tackle him. Catching the taller child flush in the side, and knocking him off his feet, the green-haired youngster gave a cry of bravery, as he carried the stunned bully across the yard, and rammed him into the playground's climbing wall just a few yards away, the act of which rattled the equipment, and knocked the air out of the delinquent's lungs. Quickly recovering, the kid with the long fingers growled, and slammed his hand into Midoriya's face, his digits wrapping around his head for extra leverage. Hey, let go of me, you quirkless moron! A brief scuffle then ensued, as Bakugo's friend attempted to pry the determined Midoriya off of him with his abnormal limbs, only for the desperate youngster to hold his ground and continue shoving him into the barrier. "No, I won't!" Izuku shouted back, despite straining against the other boy's strong palm. The blonde girl in the hoodie grinned when she saw the furious Midoriya jump to her aid. "Nice one!" She then snapped her attention back to her previous targets, and immediately spotted an enraged Kazuki charging at her with his right palm pulled back and trailing sparks. "I'm turning you into a pile of ash," Bakugo bellowed, before lunging at the girl with his palm. "Take this." The instant he was in range, he let off a small explosion to extend his reach, and hit her. However, the hooded girl easily telegraphed his movements, and read his intent, allowing her to gracefully step around him, and avoid the flash of his blast. Performing a spin, she shoved her hand into the back of the lunging Kazuki's head, and pushed him forward, sending him stumbling to the ground to fall flat on his face. "Toro!" As soon as Bakugo crashed in the dirt, the scuffed-up boy growled, slammed his fist into the floor, and scrambled back to his feet. "Damn it! Come here!" He then spun, and leapt at the girl a second time, lashing out at her with a series of wild punches that let off a loud bang with every swing. True to his character, Kazuki attempted to hit his target with the strongest hook, and the biggest explosion he could produce from his pores so that he could floor her with one hit. But for some reason, no matter how many attacks he threw or how fast he moved, the girl in the cape simply kept slipping around him with ease, hands behind her back, and a bright smile on her face. Meanwhile, back over at the climbing wall, the bully that Midoriya was still pushing into the obstacle had just started shoving the child away with his massive hands and elongated fingers, edging him out further and further. It looked as though the tides in their fight were about to turn. Feeling himself beginning to lose ground, a desperate Izuku, glaring back at the boy with the ridiculously long limbs wrapped around his face, suddenly spotted an opening he could exploit. Realizing one of his hands against the kid's torso was free, and that the other one was keeping him at bay, the youngster with messy hair gritted his teeth, drew back his hand, and thrust it upwards in a swift palm strike. The blow struck the skinny boy beneath his nose with a sickening crack, causing the bully to release his hold on Midoriya, and drop to the ground like a sack of potatoes. From there, he then clutched his face, and cried out in agony, as blood began trickling out from between the spaces of his fingers. When Izuku stumbled away panting, he looked down to see the crying delinquent remove his hands from his face, showing off his now crooked nose, which was bent upwards, and clearly broken. "Got in my nose," the boy sobbed, his voice slightly slurred due to having his nostrils clogged with blood. "You broke it." Rubbing his cheek from where the now downed bully had been shoving him, Izuku huffed. "Don't pick on me or anyone else ever again." He then raised his fist, and stepped towards the bully threateningly, who scrambled away. "You hear me? I won't! I won't! Please don't hit me again," the skinny child shouted back fearfully with tears in his eyes. Satisfied, Izuku then turned his attention back to Kazuki, and the girl again, concerned that something bad was about to happen to the newcomer. When his eyes eventually found them, a very astonishing sight awaited him. After once again trying to nail his antagonist with a palm strike, and a flash from his hand, an increasingly frustrated Bakugo then barked at the blonde girl skipping around him, and clenched his left hand angrily. "Stop moving!" He then threw a left hook at her, only to observe the blonde girl slip around it once again with a carefree giggle. "Okay." She then stood in front of Kazuki, watching him stumble back around, and glare at her. A couple seconds later, the wacky child lifted her right hand, and waved at her attacker, as if to say hello, confusing her opponent, and causing him to freeze. It was then with that very same hand, the blonde girl swung out, and cracked it across his left cheek with a loud, hard, and very painful slap. Head cocked to the side from the surprisingly fast hit, a stunned Kazuki with the newly formed handprint on his cheek looked back at the smiling girl in a dazed manner. "Did you just slap me?" "I did," the girl laughed brightly, glancing across at an equally surprised Izuku, and gesturing towards her opponent at the same time. "Weird, right?" She then turned back to the confounded delinquent, and grinned. "Want me to do it again?" Shaking himself out of his state of shock, Kazuki gave a bitter growl, and swung out at the girl once more with another punch. "Don't screw with me, you dumb girl!" His hand sparked, as he struck out, intent on nailing the irritating brat in the face with another blast of his quirk. But just before his arm could fully extend, the hooded blondie casually stepped to the boy's left, slapping him across the face a second time while simultaneously avoiding his explosion, and shoving him aside. This allowed her to gracefully step around the delinquent, while he stumbled away. Once again the enraged Kazuki attempted to strike her again. Only this time when he came at her, the girl began evading his swings, and countering them with playful slaps to his face and body, using superb evasiveness and elegance that would normally be unusual for someone of her age. The girl kept her unblinking gaze glued on her adversary, dodging his feral swings like a ballerina performing to an orchestra on stage. She even executed several flourishes akin to a Russian ballet between the boy's lunges, treating Bakugo like a dance partner, as he charged at her from every angle like a wild animal. Eventually, after dodging the child for the 12th time in a row, slapping him in the side and across the head, as she stepped around him, the blonde girl giggled and took a bow to Izuku, who was watching from nearby with a somewhat slack-jawed expression. "Thank you, thank you." But then, the moment she straightened up from her gesture of victory, Midoriya saw Bakugo coming at the young hero from behind with both hands extended, and murderous intent in his eyes. Reacting in alarm, and without any hesitation whatsoever, Izuku rushed forward. "Got you!" Kazuki shouted, lunging at the hooded freaky, as she was turning to face him. He could practically see the surprise in her eyes when his hands ignited, and prepared to let off another blast. But just before he could lash out at her, and complete his assault, the wild-haired boy was suddenly shoved aside when Izuku leapt forward, and rammed both hands into his ribs and shoulder, the act of which knocked Bakugo to the ground, where he crashed into the dirt in a cloud of dust. When it settled moments later, the stunned boy glanced up to see Izuku standing in front of the caped girl protectively, arms out, and a serious yet worried look on his face. "Stop this right now, Kaken," Midoriya stuttered, steeling himself, as he brought his fists up defensively. "There's no need to fight anymore. Please, and no one else has to get hurt." Growling at the boy's persistent demands to stand down, a physically and mentally bruised Kazuki leapt to his feet, and snapped at his schoolmate. "Stop? Hell no!" Clenching his teeth tightly, he took a moment to inhale sharply, as if holding back the urge to cry. After which he then continued his belligerent rant. "I won't stop. Everyone in the school says I have an amazing quirk, and that I will become an amazing, super strong hero someday. Just like All Might." He then seethed, as his eyes locked onto the caped girl behind the interloper. "I will not be beaten by some stupid girl in a cape, and a quirkless idiot like you." With that final bellow, he then rushed forward with the intent of blasting both kids at once, and finishing this fight. Not taking his eyes off of the charging Kazuki, Izuku hissed back at the girl behind him. "When I say now move to your left," hearing her respond with a "quite right," the little boy counted quickly, as Bakugo cranked back his right hand, preparing to take him first. Anticipating his wild haymaker, the curly-haired boy braced himself until the last second, before now, he stepped to the right while the girl leapt to the left, watching Kazuki's blow fly past him, and unleash a small flash of an explosion where his face had previously been. The instant he did, Midoriya stuck his foot out, and caught Bakugo's back leg, tripping the bully, and sending him flying forward to crash face first into the ground hard. Kazuki hit the floor with a yelp of pain, where he then curled up, and moaned from the impact. Reaching up with his hands, the boy gently brushed it over his mug. When he pulled it away, he saw blood smeared over his palm, with more suddenly dripping to the floor in front of him. It took a moment for him to realize what had happened and, after rolling over to face the duo behind him, he showed them he had a broken nose and a missing tooth. Immediately becoming concerned at his former friend's battered state, Izuku quickly rushed forward and squatted down. "Are you okay, Kaken?" He then held a hand out to him. "I'm sorry I tripped you, but you just came running right at me. Come on, let me help you up." Staring back at Izuku for a moment, and then across at the curious girl behind him, Kazuki's eyes suddenly watered. When tears started to trickle down his cheeks, the boy gritted his teeth, and smacked Midoriya's hand away, at the same time scrambling to his feet. "No, get the hell away from me," the boy hollered, jumping up and through blood and tears screamed at him. "I'm the strongest kid in our class, and I have the best quirk anyone has ever seen. How could I be beaten by a couple of worthless losers like you?" After glancing at each other, the blonde girl looked back at the sobbing Kazuki, and shrugged. "What do you mean beaten? We were just having fun, right?" Fun?" Kazuki choked out, sniffling, as he stared at the girl in a bewildered manner. "Fun? This was fun to you?" When he saw the girl nod, and Izuku cringe, the outraged child huffed angrily before barking one last time in fury. "Screw off." Unflinching in the face of the child's anger, the newcomer simply smiled, and waved. "Bye. Let's play again sometime." Bang bang. Unable to take it anymore, Bakugo turned tail, and ran, covering his bleeding nose with his arm at the same time. "I'll get you too for this. Just you wait," he yelled, doing his best to hide his sobbing while his two friends ran after him in similar states of defeat and dishevelment. After seeing the trio scamper away and leave the park behind, Izuku and his savior stood in place for several moments, looking around and noticing the two younger children that he defended stand up from their hiding spot. The green-haired boy with the bruise on his cheek sighed and smiled across at the girl in the hood. "Thanks, you really saved me back there," Midoriya chirped, feeling relief wash over him, as he offered his thanks and gratitude to the one who helped him out. Expecting the girl to respond to his words in kind, it quickly came, as a shock when he saw the stranger turn to him with a glare. "HM? Oh no, what are you talking about?" She then rounded on Izuku completely with her fists clenched, and a foreboding shadow across her face. "You're going to die too." At this, a still smiling Midoriya paled, with sweat quickly breaking out on his face. "I'll come again?" Sighing, the girl raised a hand and pointed at him chidingly. "You're only kidding yourself if you think I saved you from those guys. I only wanted to get those pests off my turf. That's all." Moving her head to the side and cracking her neck, the girl then put on a very sinister smile as she saw the child in front of her start to tremble. "Now I'm going to move on to the real reason I came here." Taking a step back when he felt the situation starting to become dangerous once again, Izuku gulped and clenched his fists in preparation for another scuffle. "BB, but aren't you pretending to be a hero?" The blonde girl blew a raspberry. "And what makes you think I'm a hero?" Raising a hand and tugging on the top of her hoodie once again, the menacing-looking girl then spoke in a very dramatic, villainous tone of voice. "Heroes always show up late, but monsters always make the first move. They appear out of nowhere and attack everything with no rhyme or reason." She then pointed at the boy in front of her and watched him take another shaky step back. "You're plain wrong if you think I'm on this side or that side. You and those little punks are on the human side, but I'm on the monster's side." Midoriya trembled, suddenly feeling even more anxious, as he saw the girl's expression become more murderous. The monster's side? A cloud of dread suddenly pulled over the area, filling the hero with a sense of trepidation. "This is scary. Is she going to beat me up? What was going to happen to him?" He stood his ground, watching and waiting nervously for the moment the girl would lash out at him and knock him to the floor. Grabbing her cape and pulling it over, the blonde child in the hoodie then took a deep breath and closed her eyes, upon which she then spoke in a deep and raspy voice. "I am the one who strikes terror into the hearts of mortal men, a sorceress who lives in the darkest shadows, spreading evil and despair wherever she goes." As she spoke, Midoriya's expression slowly transformed from fear into one of bewilderment, as he watched the girl pause for a moment before continuing what he recognized as some kind of poorly rehearsed speech. "I am the cold, the fear, and the night, the strongest, most evilest, and most feared being in the world. Beware all heroes who face me, for I am." She then unfurled her cape and struck a pose, with her hands moving behind her head and hip cocking to the side. Gyron, the human monster. For most people in this kind of situation, who were of an appropriate age and were wearing a costume, a pose like this would have normally been really cool. But for this little girl, now identified as Gyron, dressed in a slightly dirty jumper and wearing a sheet tied into a bow knot on the front, it looked kind of silly. As the would-be enemy stood there in her striking and very original villain pose, Midoriya stared at her for several seconds in a state that would be considered awe-inspiring. Moments later, however, as the strange girl gradually became more and more uncomfortable with the silence, the boy reset his jaw, tilted his head, and gave the caped blonde a strange look. "Aren't those the same lines used by the main villain from the cartoon Dragon Slayers?" the boy asked thoughtfully, watching the girl blink, and a light blush spread across her cheeks. It took a moment for the starry-eyed youngster to think about it, but eventually a cheerful smile returned to his face. "Yeah, the evil sorceress Oriana, the most powerful dark mage in the story. Are you pretending to be her?" The blushing Gyron then frowned and looked away. "Yeah. So what if I am?" "Nothing," Midoriya replied, a smile reappearing, as he reached up and scratched his head. "I think it's pretty cool that you're playing a character from a show that you really like." Rocking shyly on the spot while the boy in front of her beamed, the still hooded Gyron then clenched her fists around the hem of her jumper tensely for a moment, before then throwing a glare back at him. "Well, since you now know my secret, I cannot allow you to leave here alive." Grabbing her cape and pulling it across her chest, she then paused for a moment before unfurling it dramatically. "By the power of the night, by Luna, Orion, and Andromeda, I will cleanse this place of all witnesses and reclaim my territory." She then pointed a newly drawn weapon at Izuku. Looking down at the wand being brandished at him, Midoriya cocked an eyebrow. Is that a wooden spoon? Tensing her bottom lip, as she continued pointing the kitchen utensil at the child, Gyron then shot back at him. No, this is the Staff of Gargantua, the artifact once wielded by the Night Queen Celeste, and the same weapon used to destroy the Empire of Draguna. Prepare yourself, hero, for you are about to be sent into the next world. Grip tightening around her spoon, the young girl then took a deep breath, and yelled, Die! Gyron then proceeded to continue making her sound effect, with Izuku just standing there, and staring at her in confusion. After several seconds, and hearing the girl take a deep breath to continue her act, Izuku realized what she was trying to do, and blinked back into life. Oh. Ooh. Almeyahawk. Deciding to play along, the child threw his hands up, and pretended to stumble backwards, giving a fake cry of pain while collapsing to his knees. No, I won't let you win. Aya, kia ha ha. Gyron laughed obnoxiously while pretending to throw fake lightning bolts at her enemy. Struggle all you want. It's useless. Nothing can stand up to the power of my magic. Oh yeah? Midoriya shouted back, clenching his fists before giving a playful bellow. Rayora? Not even All Might? The strongest hero in the world? He then grinned widely, and faced off against his would-be opponent, who took a step back with her wooden spoon still drawn. I will defeat you with my own 2 hands, which, I swear, in the name of justice, and all that is good. Acting stunned, the girl then grinned, and drew her weapon back. Bring it on. She then watched Izuku lunge at her in slow motion with a punch, which she playfully dodged, and began blasting him with waves of magical spells, and from there they proceeded to play. From their perspective, their game transformed into some kind of an epic battle, where Izuku, acting as the hero he admired most in the whole world, was standing up against Gyron's pretend attacks, and powering through them. However, judging from a distance, it just looked like a couple of friends playing with each other, and having a ball. From the way they were laughing, giggling, and chasing each other in between bouts of running, and fake attacking, it was clear they were having the time of their lives. Both Izuku and Gyron were so caught up in their little game of hero and villain that they completely forgot about the 2 children that they had been protecting from Bakugo and his friends. In fact, after seeing the 2 older children begin to act out their big, flashy fantasy battle across the playground, the little boy and girl just left. Obviously they would be at this for a while. The end. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.